welcome back everybody to Interstellar Quests. We are playing Kerbal Space Program, and it's a stock, but with loads of mods. And we're trying to get Interstellar, basically like Scott Manley did all those years ago. And welcome in episode number 3 already, in which we are launching Wayfinder A1. In the first episode you saw us getting to orbit and basically figuring out rocketry. Number 2 was getting to manned spaceflight, but number 3 is of course getting to the Mun. And you are watching the Calypso Heavy, or the Calypso B variant with 4 boosters. It is capable of carrying 2.9 tons to low Kerbin orbit, and its payload today is Wayfinder A1. It's in the 5th launch of a Calypso rocket, so we're getting pretty good at it. And you can see me plot a maneuver node to the Mun, and we'll make a mid-course correction somewhere. Because this is not just a probe that we're going to crash into it, though we have that contract. This is also not just a probe to get a rover out there. This is also a science contract. So typically I'll pick up a ton of contracts and hope they will either go simultaneously, or we find a different way of getting that science and those funds. And you're looking at the rover making its final descent. It has all the science equipment that I've unlocked so far, and it uses a very, very interesting design based on a square plate. However, I misjudged the power of the Mun's gravity, and basically I just started burning a little bit too late to get the suicide burn in correctly. But we have more than one, so number 2, I'm not going to show you the entire flight again. Number 2 is the Wayfinder B2. And it has a slightly bigger transfer stage, which gives it a little bit more oomph to go down. And I should be watching the final suicide burn a little bit closer. So suicide burn is basically a way for you to trigger the burn at the most efficient moment. So the idea is that by the time you've completed the burn, you've exactly reached 0 velocity, but you've also reached 0 altitude. And I added a reaction control wheel, not just to do flick flux. Oops, ran out of fuel, unfortunately, but that will give us the crashed contract. But nothing broke other than a fuel tank, I think, and maybe 1 or 2 of the engines that burst off. The craft itself is completely functional. Quite a surprise. The undocking was uneventful, and I then discovered we have colliders in parallax on the stuff that gets generated, which will make transferring across the Mun slightly more complicated. You can see me drive around gathering science, and the intent was to land at the edge of one of the biomes and then try to get to a second biome. Number 3, launching a little bit later. Well, once you figured out how to land something on the Mun, landing stuff on Minmus is easy. Sure, it takes a little bit more delta V to get there, but this thing has plenty of delta V. And the landing sequence is actually way easier because of Minmus's lower gravity. So, exact same craft, almost similar trajectory. You can hear the science gathering tool bleeping in the back, telling me that you could get material science from this orbit, but yeah, I want to save and get that from Minmus, of course. You can see that the TWR is much higher in this lower gravity. The entire craft is shaking, and we gently make our descent to a targeted location. So one of the contracts is to land at a specific location, which is we're going to try for Minmus, because I'm really confident that I can make it with the delta V that I have. So this playthrough will require a ton of science for me to gather, and gathering it effectively basically means more interesting videos for you to watch, because I'm not stuck in low Kerbin orbit for a long time, but also for myself. I tend to get A, bored, but B, build so many crafts that the entire save file slows down to the extent that I don't want to play anymore. Final few meters in the descent. See me check the engines again. I'm wondering whether I could actually land on RCS only, because that might be preferable rather than pushing the engines to its utter minimum. I really had to slow down the engines here, and I think I already tweaked them down in the VAB, saying the maximum amount of thrust should be less than the default. But that's something you should take into account when landing on bodies that have a very low surface gravity. Because if you push those engines too hard, the craft will just flow up and probably flip around. But we're making a very gentle descent. You can see me pulse the landing and touching down. Perfect textbook landing. We decouple our rover very carefully so it doesn't flip in this gravity and start driving around on the Mun. And again, we're close to the second biome. It took me about half an hour to drive there and get science from that biome as well. But yeah, this is great news for our space program. We have tons of science now, and you can see me bring up the ScanSat map and trying to figure out where we are and where we're going. You can see that these things really make a big difference. You can discover the different biomes from orbit. But you will also be able to discover resources, which is something we're going to need later on in some of the upcoming episodes, where we're going to drill for ore and basically try to get fuel from our moons. Because I think that these two will be our main spaceports, where we're going to build large orbital vessels rather than pushing them up all the way from Kerbin. Speaking of Kerbin, it's time to launch another rocket. You are looking at a Vulcan rocket. So I talked about Calypso Heavy being able to push 2.93-ish tons to low Kerbin orbit. That's not quite enough. At some point you're going to need something more powerful. And this is a 5-ton rocket. It has 2 stages. The first one is hydrolox and solid rocket boost. Just for the oomph to get it off the pad. It doesn't really need it, but it just gives me a couple of meters of delta V extra and a little bit more TBWR in the beginning. And amazing plumes. Like, you gotta love waterfall plumes because they look fantastic. On board is Skylab 1. So, like I told you in the previous episode, my initial idea is to be a little bit wasteful perhaps with the space stations, a bit like how the Russians did it, like they burned through a number of salute stations before they ended up with something big and permanent. But I reconsidered that because I discovered that at the station that I've put in orbit, Skyforge 1 actually has an experiment that is not available on the other lab modules. So this means that Jap and Bob will have to relocate, so they gotta leave. And they're relocating to Skylab, and then they're gonna dock Skylab to Skyforge. This will give us the opportunity to get some of that science in, and actually on the way up Skylab already collected some data, which Bob is going to analyze and turn into more science. But it turned out to be really difficult. Skylab lacks attitude controls to properly align them, and the diet is sluggish with this big fuel tank on the back. And if you misalign and you touch wrong, you can see you start rotating one of the crafts, and it becomes messy really quickly. So you have to be almost exactly spot on. And I really struggled with this for, I don't know, like 15 minutes. Before I decided just to ditch the fuel stage. In theory, the Dias have enough monopropellant to return home. And you can already see the small engines to the side. They should be able to use that and recycle it. They're very similar to what the SpaceX Dragon is supposed to be like. Not that we want to be associated with Elon Musk, but yeah. You can see me fiddle around a little bit more. Every time we touch the space station, it starts to rock around, so you have to be very careful. But then I figured, hey, why not just enhance the magnetic strength? And that seemed to do it. Now they pull closer and they're actually locked in place. It's easier to dock Skylab. because now I have complete control over the craft. And Skyforge is docked with Skylab. And you can see the extension connector already on the back. So we're probably turning this into a big space station at some point. But for now, this is fine. Bob gets out of his chair, opens the hatch, and starts wandering around the amazing new lab that he's got. And of course, he has full access. He can go through the docking node, as you can see over here. And not all of the hatches are working properly, so I need to be more careful when constructing craft that I only put free IVA stuff together that is actually free IVA, because it's kind of cool to just go around like this and find your way. However, Bob is not going to do that forever, because we're launching Diet A2, which is the crew rotate. And the crew rotate can launch on a cheap rocket like the standard Calypso. I think the capsule is less than 2 tons. They get into orbit with so much delta V that they can use the main stage actually to get circularized, and we can use the transfer stage to get our rendezvous with the station. This means that Bob and Jab have to leave, so they have to undock because we don't have enough docking ports. Remember, we had a problem with one of the docking ports on Skyforge, which was of the wrong size. So we're bringing a spare one in this canister. You can see we have a regular diet, but it brings a capacity storage with it. And in that container is some equipment that we are going to use to enhance the station. And this also means that Bill needs to be on board because he is the only engineer currently in the crew. I did hire Angar as the new scientist, and he's going to work on probably all the sciencey stuff, and Bill is going to be relocated to the materials lab at some point to figure out that part. This is me trying to figure out the correct orientation in a kind of weird way, but it worked. The Diet actually had a modern docking port, which you will see in a minute. So it has 2 docking ports. It has the docking port that we regularly use, like this little pedal one, which I really like, but it's kind of small, and for a capsule to be used as it made more sense to have a larger docking port. So we have a 1.25 meter docking port on this one from the Ursa mod, and we're gonna flip the craft around and dock it like that, and because there's better authority right now, I can just use MacJab to perform the docking sequence. Here we go. Locked and loaded. Meanwhile, Bill and Jab and Bob are on their way back in their Diet spacecraft. Regular deorbit borne. They did run out of monopropellant before the periapsis was really low, so it's going to take a significant time for them to pass through the upper atmosphere before they actually descend. But a lot of time in this case means something like 20 minutes of game time, maybe a couple of minutes in real life. They get quite hot as they burn through the upper layer of the atmosphere, and you get all this plasma buildup around the craft. But now they have deployed their parachutes, and they are making a water landing quite far from the KSC. But I guess they are happy swimmers, and they enjoy the sunshine in the calm ocean. Next up is the Minotaur, and you have not seen this one before. Basically, this is the Matchstick, but beefed up a little bit. So I needed something that could launch about half a ton to orbit, which the Matchstick can't do, and it's way too much for the Calypso. So this is mainly a solid rocket stage to get it off the pad, and then a liquid rocket stage to get it into orbit, circularize it, and it could even do the insertion borne, but we're not going to do that because we have a simple monopropellant stage on. Now you may also recognize the shape, because the shape is exactly the same as the Viking that we used in episode 1. However, this is not a manned craft. This time we are using it as a cargo ship, and it has a special provision that none of the other crafts actually have. It can carry crystals back home. So this is part of the kind of a mini economy game that you can play. So I'm not sure if you're going to play it that well. I'm not sure how much money it's going to bring. But you can grow crystals in space and then bring them back as cargo, which is what the Minotaur is going to do. So Skyforge, creating the crystals, Minotaur, bringing them home. And now it's time for Bill actually to get to work. Because remember, we sent him up there with a mission. And so he takes on his EVA suit and jetpack. I do want to download the MacBoots app at some point because I think that's a cool thing to do. But this tiny, wrongly tweak-scaled port should go away. And the cargo plane brought us a new docking port, which is slightly larger. Well, it's the correct size. It's a 0.938 meter docking port. And I guess you could crawl through that. So Bill there adding it, and you can also see another science equipment that we've added to it. Yeah, but that's it. We are happy in space around Kerbin for now.